Namaste and greetings. I, Zubia Moin, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, प्रभाव एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on New India's economic transformation and Union Budget 2023 to 24. This discussion is organized by the Center for Study of Finance and Economics as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of the Economy, Econ Dialogue. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget, fiscal year 2023 to 24, being organized from February 2 to 7, 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair and moderator for today's discussion is Professor Mukul Ashar, former Professor Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, and Visiting Distinguished Professor, IMPRI. The panelists for today are Dr. A. Amarender Reddy, Principal Scientist, Agricultural Economics, ICAR-Central Research Institute for Dryland Agriculture, Hyderabad, Dr. Radhika Pandey, Senior Fellow, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, Mr. V. Ramakrishnan, Managing Director, Organization Development, Singapore, Professor K. Sita Prabhu, Visiting Professor, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, Visiting Faculty, Indian School of Development Management, ISDM, New Delhi. And Professor Prabir De, Professor, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, New Delhi. We welcome all of you. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Professor Mukul Ashar to start the deliberation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Zubia Moin. It's a pleasure to be participating in the series of thematic deliberations on the budget. IMPRI and its director and management must be heartily congratulated to take into account that budget analysis cannot be confined to one session in a broad way, but it requires thematic, detailed discussions by various experts. And the number of experts that I went through various thematic discussions is very impressive. So congratulations to IMPRI and its director. Let me make some broad observations before we turn to the speakers whose sequence that we have identified. This is the first budget of India's Amrit Kal, which is 2022 to 2047. 2047, India will complete 100 years of independence. And the vision is to have India as a confident, developed nation by then. Before I get to the budget itself, there are 5 points about the economic survey, which is worth reading, but which usually gets ignored in the excitement of the budget proposals. All of you will talk about budget proposal. I'll just mention a few points here. But I have the slides, please. The first is that the economic survey, and this time economic survey of 2022-23 and the 2023-24 budget are synchronized, are in harmony with each other, which usually is not the case. So it is obvious that there has been a close collaboration in this survey and the budget. So the survey has a long-term focus with structural and other reforms needed to see India's emergence as uh, a, a confident, developed nation by 2047. The priority is to promote India's interest and develop, more importantly, capacity to do so. You may want to pursue your interest, you may not have capacity. And rapidly shared colonized mindsets and practices. 2023-4 budget, the expenditure is INR 45 trillion, which is 32,000 INR per person. So the question is, we are spending 45 trillion. This is just at the central government level. The states are different. Are we getting the quality of governance amenities that are worth the expenditure that is made? Next slide, please. This is just a broad overview of gross domestic product of India, of divided by gross domestic product for the world. We are fairly high, over 0.30 in 1965. Then we went down. Now we're beginning to go up. The slope is increasing. So the idea is that we should continue to move up in this ratio. Next one. Second is that this is the global growth forecast where India at 6.1% is among the fastest growing economy in 2023. That is a projection. Next one. We'll leave it for right now here. The second point, besides the long term, is that the largest chapter in economic survey, which has 12 chapters plus statistical appendix, is chapter 6. It is titled Social Infrastructure and Employment, the Big 10. Now, this is a very different way of looking at various types of government schemes that tend to empower. So the budget, a survey, moving from entitlement to empowerment. That is a huge mindset change that we have brought about. The third point about survey is, leave it there. The third point is that the economic survey and the 23-24 budget numbers are credible. For the last 2-3 years, we have been trying to be much more transparent about our fiscal numbers, including off-budget expenditures and revenue into the budget, and so on. This is very good, and this trend needs to continue. Now, we said that the long-term focus, and one of the indications, as an example, is the union government's capital expenditure as a percent of GDP. And that is increasing. You can see the slope is very sharp, particularly since the 2020. And within that capital expenditure, next one, the composition is changing. Instead of relying on public enterprises and grants, we are relying on direct capex, and with Gati Shakti, others, and so on, the productivity and efficiency of this expenditure can be expected to go up. Next. The other indicator is the National Industrial Corridor Development Program, which is for futuristic industrial cities to compete with the manufacturing and investment destinations in the world. Next. This is just a graph that shows that. Next. Okay, fine. So we are done with our slides. I'll go to the couple of other points. One thing that I was impressed with the survey and with the budget is that they do have a strategy which is credible, but they are willing to be very flexible within that strategy with specific initiatives and so on. So one of the terms that is used is that we have known unknowns and we have unknowns. And therefore, there is every reason for us to be humble. We are looking at long term, and they provide range rather than a number. Last point, the statistical tables and others are made available in Excel. And I hope the researchers will take advantage of it to do that Excel tables and do more data and empirical driven research and draw nuanced conclusions from that rather than have generalities from preconceived mindset. And this is one of the mindset changes that we need to undergo if we want to achieve the 2047 vision. Sorry, with this preliminary remarks, may I now request Dr. Pandey to make her presentation, please.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to this session, and thank you for inviting me, Dr. Arjun. Thank you, Professor, for giving me the chance to give my inputs and my thoughts on the budget. So first thing is the key highlight, which I understand is that the budget tries to do a balancing act between fiscal consolidation and boosting growth. So this is a very important takeaway given the context that we are at this point in time. We know that our global growth is challenging. We have global headwinds. The other headwinds are monetary policy tightening. So with these challenges in mind, what best the budget could do is to give a signaling message that it is wanting to boost growth, but at the same time, keep an eye on fiscal consolidation. So that is what it tries to do at the very outset, that it is trying to maintain fiscal consolidation. So for the next financial year, the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is pegged at 5.9% of GDP. And for this year, the government has maintained its fiscal deficit to GDP ratio at 6.4% despite the additional expenditures. And at the same time, in the speech, the FM reaffirmed the commitment of the government to achieve the medium-term target of 4.5% of GDP by FY26. Now, this is something that we would like to see in the next 2 years. We would have to see a more aggressive fiscal reduction strategy, because now if we are able to attain 5.9% of GDP in FY24, then for the next 2 years, we have to move to 4.5% of GDP, which will require aggressive reduction in the deficit targets and also material increase in revenue receipts. So that is something that needs to be seen. But in the current year and in the next year, given the global headwinds, the fiscal consolidation roadmap has been kept intact, which is a very credible thing. Now, why it is important? It is important because if we have a lower fiscal deficit, it will help in cooling demand. It will allow the Reserve Bank of India to focus more on inflation and at the same time start lowering interest rates, because if we have a lower fiscal deficit, it helps in demand management as is. Now, given that, it has also, the budget has given twin growth boosters. One is in the form of enhanced capital expenditure, and the second is in the form of moderation in personal income taxation. So if we go back to fiscal deficit numbers, as we talked about, that in this year, the fiscal deficit, both BE as well as RE, both budget estimates as well as revised estimates would be 6.4% of GDP. So as a percent of GDP, we have been able to attain the fiscal deficit target. But if we look in terms of absolute magnitude, there has been a deviation of almost rupees 1 lakh crore or 1 trillion rupees in terms of absolute numbers of fiscal deficit. And this was understandable given the additional expenditure the government had to incur during the course of the year on food subsidy, on fertilizer subsidy, on enhanced Manrega allocation, and so on. So we got the comfort from higher nominal GDP growth, because at the time of the budget, the nominal GDP growth was pegged at around 11%, but the actual nominal GDP coming from the advanced estimates for the current fiscal came in at 15.4%. So our denominator was big, so we were able to achieve the fiscal deficit to GDP target of 6.4%. So that is what we saw in the current year. But in the next year, the global growth as well as India's economic growth is expected to moderate. The nominal GDP growth is pegged at 10.5%. So now we have to see whether the higher GDP growth comfort that we got in the current financial year, will we get that in the next year also or not? So that is something that needs to be seen, because we were able to attain the 6.4% deficit reduction target due to higher nominal GDP in the current financial year. Now, we look at fiscal deficit, but equally important is also to look at revenue deficit. And there, in the revised estimates, the revenue deficit target is 4.1% of GDP, and the government has budgeted to reduce it to 2.9% of GDP. It's quite a steep reduction. It is quite an ambitious reduction in the revenue deficit, given that in the current financial year, if we can see, there has been a deviation from 3.8% to 4.1%. So all these assumptions, these calculations are based on the assumption that the kind of shocks that rocked the economy in the current year, the kind of shocks in the form of higher commodity prices due to the war, monetary tightening, all those shocks will abate in the next financial year. It will be more or less a normal year, and we will be able to achieve a revenue deficit reduction to 2.9% of GDP. In terms of market borrowing, gross market borrowing is pegged at 15.4 lakh crore and net market borrowing at 11.8 lakh crore, also in line with market expectations. So it's not because markets, especially the bond market investors, were fearing that there will be a big spurt in market borrowing. That we did not see, and therefore the bond yields also did not rise concomitantly. Bond market was able to accept this number with ease and calm, and so the borrowings are also well within the comfort range of the market.
Dr. Pandey, sorry,
Yes.
3 minutes, please.
Yes. So then the next highlight is the capex, where the capex is targeted at 10 lakh crore. This is a growth of 37% over the revised estimates of FY23. However, execution will be the key, because even in this financial year, we have seen that the revised estimate is 3% lower than the budget estimate. Also, effective capex is 13.7 lakh crore. What is even more encouraging is the urban infrastructure fund of 10,000 crore, which has been set up, which will really help in, if executed properly, will help in providing impetus to urban infrastructure in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and will help, and is labor intensive. Another point is the boost to incentives to states to boost capital spending, which is a strategy that the central government adopted last year, has been continued this year. where 1.3 lakh crore 50-year interest-free loan has been given to the states. Again, execution will be very important because till now what we have seen is that the states have been slow in spending on capital expenditure. So here I've given one example, Uttar Pradesh, which has budgeted one of the highest amounts on capital expenditure, more than 1 lakh crore, has been able to spend just 32% till December. So we need to, what is important along with allocation is to step up the administrative capacity to spend the capital expenditure during the year and to have a better fiscal planning. Just another way of looking at capital expenditure, that the share of capital expenditure is now increased to 30%. We are reprioritizing expenditure from revenue to capital. The share of revenue expenditure is going down. Now, I'll just take 2 minutes on explaining this slide before finishing my remarks. One is, if we look at this budget at a glance table, there are 2-3 key takeaways. One is that when we are trying to achieve fiscal consolidation, 2 things we are doing. One is that we are using more conservative revenue estimates targets, and the other thing is that we are doing expenditure compression. Let's talk about expenditure compression. So if we look at row number 9, total expenditure, and if we see that in terms of percent to GDP, there has been a reduction from 15.3% to 14.9%. So there is an expenditure compression happening, which is primarily due to revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure growth is pegged at just 1.2%, a meager 1.2% for the next year. If we go by that, if there are deviation, then there could be deviation in the fiscal consolidation roadmap as such. Also, another point is that the revenue receipts targets are also kept very conservative, which is a good thing given that the GDP growth is expected to moderate in the coming financial year. Another point is on the expenditure compression has been achieved through reduction in subsidies, through a cut in Manrega allocation, flat allocation to PM Kisan. So these are the 2 main schemes where we have seen either a cut or just not an enhanced allocation, primarily in the rural and in the agricultural sector. This just shows subsidy, fertilizer, food, petroleum. We have seen a decline from the reserve estimates from the revised estimates to the budget estimates. Primarily, I want to show the fertilizer expenditure. We have seen a decline from 2.25 to 1.75 lakh crore for fertilizer, from food from 2.8 to 1.97. So this is the rationalization that is happening in the revenue expenditure. And the last point is about tax benefits, that we have seen an increase in tax rebate limit from 5 to 7 lakh. Reduction in number of slabs, increase in the reduction in the higher surcharge limit from 37 to 25%, which will lead to reduction in the higher tax rate as well. Now, this is applicable. This is a good move, which will give a boost to consumption, particularly at the lower end of the spectrum, because we see that these are the people who were more impacted by the higher inflation that we saw in 2022. The key thing is how much migration happens from the old taxation regime to the new taxation regime, given that if the household expenditure or payments are committed to, say, household loans or insurance premium, housing loans, and so on, then the migration would not be substantial. So the benefit from this particular step would arise on the basis of how much migration we will see from the old taxation regime to the new taxation regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for a very succinct macro and fiscal elements in the budget. We may now move to Professor Day.
Thank you very much. I thank the organizer for the invitation, and also thank to my respected Professor Sir, Professor Mukul sir, for the invitation and putting me in the panel. The numbers and the nitty-gritties of the budget is well placed by previous speaker, Professor Pandey. Now, what I'm going to do in my allotted time I have no PowerPoint. I will be just simply sharing my perspective on the budget, and particularly from the point of view of the external economy. As you know, RIS is a part of Ministry of External Affairs, so I would be more, tempted to share my personal views again on the foreign side of the budgets. But before I come and share some of the way forward or takeaways, one thing go by Professor Ashar and Professor Pandey, that this is a budget very unique because our capital expenditure, which has been allotted something around US $10 trillion in dollar terms, 33%, something around. This is the rise in the capital expenditure. This is certainly is going to help boost the Indian economy in terms of infrastructure development. Point number two is that also at the same time, if this is the first year of the Amrit Kal, and Amrit Kal is going to culminate into 25 years from now, 2047, India putting in the developed country. So this 25 years, the journey, that's why perhaps we would like to know what kind of achievements that we may like to target if we have an GDP in current price, which is about 25 trillion, and by 2041, and by 7 trillion by 2030. Now, the economic survey, and Professor Asar talked about a 6.8% growth. And I'm sure, and you will all agree, that all the panelists here, respected panelists, that we can't go more than 7%, just my own thinking, because our base is getting bigger. At the same time, we are going to face many headwinds, very stronger headwinds in the global market. It's not so easy to forecast those, neither easy to do some prescriptions in advance that if we go forward, going towards 7 trillion by 2030 or 25 trillion by 2041. So Amrit Kal, 25 years, what kind of Amrits that the divine drinks or whatever you call it, we are going to share with our population of the country people. 3-4 things which I think this beginning is the first year is quite positive. The numbers by Professor Pandey also indicates that the fiscal deficits is going down, 2021-22 revised deficit versus 2022-23 revised deficit. If you compare, there is a clear trend about the number is going down. That's good health sign of the union budget. At the same time, I see that credit to the SME sector has also grown up, export has grown up, capital expenditure has grown up. So some of the positive sides are very encouraging. At the same time, I see the numbers that most of our income from the budget, it goes to pay our interest and subsidies and many other settled projects. But if we'd like to take the new projects like high-speed corridor, if we'd like to bring some connectivity projects with our neighborhood, if we'd like to extend our exports with the new products, or if we like to encourage our global value chain, we may like to perhaps the budget giving us the new formula, the new kind of incentives, the new kind of structures. Well, the tax collection is good. The GST is going up is good. But at the same time, if we are planning to have a tax base from 5 lakhs to 7 lakhs, these are all fine numbers. But if and there are several other new initiatives, like the Professor Asaf said, that Prime Minister's Gati Shakti project, national monetization, and several other infrastructure connectivity across the country. Well, these are some of the positive sides, some of the encouraging sides, and government indeed for last few years has done well in terms of consolidating its position in the infrastructure, moving from more labor-intensive infrastructure to more futuristic, digital economy side, agricultural sector, tax collection, tax reform. Those are I see some positive things. But let me tell you that what we need at the same time from the government while looking at our external sector. I'm really not very impressive in a way that I'm not very happy to see the numbers like 45 trillion, the total budget, whereas the allotment to external affairs is just simply less than 0.5%. The total allotment to external affairs is something around 18,000 crores of rupees, which is less than 0.5% of total revenue, 45 trillion. Now, if we look at what we're doing in the external, in the external areas, like giving development cooperation aid, some of the centrally aided projects, many places I see, there's a clear budget cut. For example, the budget's going to Bhutan and Nepal. If we leave out to them, most of the sectors we see there is a clear budget cut. That could be a reason that why there is so much, change in our external aided projects and aid to our neighborhood. It's because the way it has been highlighted in the media that it's basically the election the next year is coming, so we cannot have some charity, going to look at, the neighborhood with a higher amount. So this is somewhere the explanation goes. But projects like, Chabahar Port, or projects supporting an international training and capacity building program, or projects in Africa, or some of the new markets that we go for Latin America, there are we haven't done, but or neither in terms of allotment. So these are the things I hope we will be going to see 2024 towards the end, when we have a full budget. Probably this year the budget is the last budget before the election of 2024. So 2025, almost about one year, 10 months from now, or something like that, we have to wait for new allotments for the centrally aided projects in neighborhood, or our aid to our foreign in the neighborhood foreign countries. So this is I think some gap I have noticed. Second is we thought about that the budget will also talk about some kind of a reforms, in terms of our foreign trade policy. As we have seen that foreign trade policy is pending, for several years. It's not coming up. Now, if we reduce the, import duty that have been done in the budget to encourage electronic sectors in the mobile phone, television, smart computer assembly in the country, and then linking it to the global value chain. But there hasn't, seen much. I have not seen some similar kind of, attempt in other sectors where we can do much better. For example, we have been telling that how about removal of the inverted duty structure? Because some of the products that we are importing as a finished good, where the duty is much less, so the import is much cheaper, then doing it more parts and components, value addition, doing more production assembling. So this is where we haven't seen something. Neither we have seen India's taking advantage of his the duty arbitrage. There are many products, there are many services, for example, we can do much better if we take an advantage for in those lines. Well, if I may come to the last part of my presentation, that what are the risks still we have? The recession in advanced countries is not over. If you see the WTO, the trade forecast, they have cut the growth. The number tells it is from 3.5% 2022 to 1% in 2023. So there is slowing down with the world trade is likely to be expected. That is going to have an impact on the Indian economy as well. Now, if we are going to have a more import-driven, which is quite likely, because 7 lakhs tax exemption base has been widened, that would be more liquid, more consumption-driven economy. So there'll be more demand for the goods, and I think the current account deficit will go up. So this will certainly going to affect our deficit calculations. Again, my quick thinking on that. So recession in an advanced economy is going to have some stronger impact. Continue to. Then extension of the Ukraine-Russian war. We cannot. This is also going to going to have a very strong impact, like energy crisis, food crisis, etc., etc. So revival of Indian economy, coming out of pandemic, then facing so many headwinds, like one after another. And is that, a revival is stronger enough to, for the coming days? So that's point number two. Then some of the developed countries, they are continuing with their monetary tightening is continuing. For example, in the United States of America, many others. There's also going to affect on us how, look at our currency. Further weakening of the currency is certainly, widen our current account deficit. So these are the risks quickly come in my mind, but there are certainly some positive points in the budget and which I have discussed. Now, way forward, which I suggest that one is certainly there is a clear trend that India's 2050 and between 2050 to 2070, our net zero commitment. So energy transition, there is a kind of an allotment. So this is a good sign that we have taken a policy at the globally, along with other countries. So government of India is coming here in the budget. Many things can be done out of the budget as well. So, so government of India is coming here to support our energy transition. That's a good point. Second is, I think that we see the infrastructure sector, our port capacity, our railway network, road network, many other infrastructure areas. I have seen it through the capital expenditure. It's a good sign. And primarily, these are within the economy, the nationalistic. But if we talk about 1 trillion export, in by 2030, our infrastructure network also needs to be connected with the neighborhood and the globally. So okay, budget cannot deal much that, but certainly there could be we can initiate centrally aided projects. Certainly,
Professor Day?
Yeah.
Sorry, 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, I'll be finishing, sir, maybe for that. And certainly aiding the countries in the neighborhood. And this is not done somehow, or there might not be many scopes here. So this is somehow the gap I found, and which can be rectified in coming years through the budget or through other modes. Second is, third point is the reform that which we can do. And budget, I have not seen much indication coming in terms of allocation is the healthcare industries. So this is somehow we need more support. Government has talked about nursing colleges, some medical college, etc. But we need more specialist services. Last but not the least, I discussed about external economy, but which we have ignored in the budget, and many of the commentators will disagree or might agree with me. The budget is not the way to correct the center state, the structural gaps. If you come to India, and you will see the clear two sides. One is the very rising, promising India, and if you put a central line from Delhi all the way to Kanyakumari, mostly facing Kanyakumari, the right side is the prospering part of it. If you leave out of Madhya Pradesh, rest part of India is falling behind. Bihar, last part of Madhya Pradesh, part of Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, Northeast, Orissa, Telangana. So we should be very careful that while we are drawing kind of an Amrit Kal for 25 years, honest attempt, but we should also try to bring the gap between the center and states. After all, India means the states, Indian budget means the states. So that has to be, that should be some attempt to rectify the rising regional disparity between Indian government and parts of the states and between central government and the state government. So I stop here, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Day. Thank you for bringing in the external sector, which is usually, as you indicated, not very much discussed in connection with the budget. So this is a new perspective, and more research, I hope, will be done on linking with the external sector. May I now request Professor A. Sita Prabhu to make her presentation?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to IMPRI for inviting me for this very interesting discussion. I think we have at the crossroads, as it were, as was pointed out, we have the beginning of Amrit Kal, and it's very rare to see budgets taking a long-term view of the finances. So to that extent, that this budget has taken a long-term view is laudable. And but we are at a situation where the world is going through turmoil. There is high inequality and unsustainability. These are the two challenges that we face, and business as usual strategies are not going to work. So if there is talk of transformation, and the webinar today is named as economic transformation, I would say humbly place that economic transformation is interlinked with transformation in other areas as well. And while the budget recognizes this and has brought about a change in the mindset, as it were, to focus on capital expenditure, obviously it has had limited resources within which it is placing its entire scenario. And therefore, the revenue expenditures, as was pointed out, has got somewhat of a hit. The overall resource kitty is the same, and physical infrastructure has got a big boost. And there is also an increasing tendency, if I may say so, of building of physical infrastructure being equated with vikas. Development is seen more as development of physical infrastructure, and it's also conspicuous. And in being the last budget before election, it is natural to show huge increases in physical infrastructure. But I would say that a country, someone said that India is states. I would say India is people. And what is it for the people, especially the social services here? The capital expenditure would yield benefits. There would be multiplier effects, but they would yield benefits over a 3 to 5 year term, medium term. Whereas if you neglect the social services, if you neglect the people's requirements, there would be a catastrophe, as the COVID-19 has amply demonstrated, and the effects of it would be felt right now, not in the 3 to 5 year period. So I think the reason why this choiceless choice, as it were made between capital expenditure, between physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, if I were to say, social infrastructure is less conspicuous. It is also the capabilities of the people to build that takes much more time. And it is something that has always received lower attention in our budgets. And I'll come to that in a moment. The trade-off has had to, ideally, both physical and social infrastructure could be given a boost, which is what it should be. While we are developing the physical infrastructure, the enhancement of capabilities of the people, along with the empowerment, is absolutely essential. When there is no enhanced capabilities, mere empowerment will not yield too much of a result, as we have seen time and again. Now, the size of the budget, many analysts have pointed out, Ratin Roy particularly, that the size of the budget has been shrinking continuously. The government's ability to spend as a percentage of GDP is shrinking. In 21-22, it was 17.72%, the public expenditure ratio, the amount of total expenditure as a percentage of GDP. In current budget, it's come to 15.29. So 15% is the public expenditure ratio, total expenditure as a percentage of GDP. Is there an ideal? There is analysis that shows that a public expenditure ratio of 25% and a social expenditure ratio, that is the proportion of social services as a total of total expenditure of the government, should be about 40%. These two are the necessary conditions for a government to deliver services to the people in an adequate manner. Now, our public expenditure ratio has come down over the years to 15%, and the social expenditure ratio continues to hover around 25 to 26% of total expenditure. Therefore, the ability of the government to boost up the much required social attainments is in serious question. And why this has become an important issue is that India is a middle income country, which is true, but it's a uniquely placed because it carries the highest burden of poor in the world. As per government's own economic survey, there are 229 million multidimensional poor in 2020. And more importantly, there are vulnerable to multidimensional poverty, those are the people just above the poverty line. And these are about 261 million. So we have responsibility towards 490 million people who are poor and vulnerable. And in the era of climate change, these are the most vulnerable people. And if we do not enhance allocations for the services that go directly to the poor and vulnerable, I think we are going to be not be able to come out of the middle income trap. Our dream of becoming a developed country may be somewhat muted, because no middle income country has been able to cross the threshold and move into a high income country without enhancing the capabilities of the people. There is a capability poverty trap in which they get caught for decades, 60, 70, 80 years. Many countries have been in the middle income status. Now, I would just say one more thing, that the budget has also laudable for bringing in the concerns. There are two aspects of the budget. One is on equity and one is on sustainability. And both these I would spend briefly some time. About the equity part, the government has shown its commitment to have allocations given to many of the neglected sections of the population. It has given some allocations for millets research, the poor farmers. It has also tried to look at the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. It has also tried to give skills certain emphasis. Now, all this is very laudable, but the core sectors that are there, as it were, of education and health, the allocations continue to be low at 2.5% for education and 1.2% for public expenditure for health. Now, when you look at the requirements of the education sector, you will find that in India's literacy average number of years of schooling of about 6 to 7 years is very, very low. And a minimum of 10 years of schooling is essential for the education to yield benefits to the economy. And if we are to actually turn into a developed nation, we would need to spend much more on secondary education. And I would have liked to see a mission on improving the quality of secondary education. And even in the elementary education, the quality of education has slipped further in the COVID-19 period. And as the ICAR survey has pointed out, only 39% in grade 2 can read a text of the same level. What against these requirements of improving secondary education, what we get is centers of excellence for artificial intelligence, schemes of national digital laboratory, revamped teachers training via district institutes of education and training, and national apprenticeship program. I'm not finding fault with these programs. These are essential, but they cannot be a substitute for enhancing the allocations to education, which have remained stuck. And the recommendation of allocating 6% of GDP to education remains a distant dream. Regarding life expectancy, we are still not at the level of even Bangladesh, because Bangladesh has 72 years of life expectancy as against India's 67. The IMR and the infant mortality rate and child mortality rate are declining, but the rate of decline is not adequate to reach our SDG targets. Nutrition, we have 1/3 of our children still underweight or stunted, and yet the allocations for these important sectors have not been enhanced. Within this, we also find that the states are unable to give their part of the allocations against the central schemes. And just as there is a support from the center to the capital expenditure, I would have very much liked to see a scheme providing states support for the social sector schemes so that they can spend adequately on these. The factor that allocations that are given are also not spent is a universal problem, and unless we improve the efficiency with which we are able to spend the money, we are not going to achieve the progress that we want on social attainments quickly or rapidly enough. Yeah, I'll conclude shortly. And one other thing that I would like to say, that there is duplication of effort. There are too many schemes of small amounts, even of central schemes. Take the example of direct benefits transfer scheme. There are 300 different schemes of 53 ministries involved. The effectiveness is seriously curtailed. So some attention should be given to raising more resources as well as utilizing them better. Now, when you look at the climate change part, I think we have made huge commitments under the Panchamrit scheme, where we are trying to get into net zero by 2070, and even other allocations, and also find to go towards renewable energy. We have committed that we'll meet 50% of energy requirements with renewable energy by 2030 and reduce carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. As against this, the schemes that have been given are Green Hydrogen Mission, a huge allocation of 17,900 crores, Gobardhan program of 500 waste to wealth plants to be set up, including 200 biogas plants for 10,000 crores, and so on. But the climate policy initiative, which argues that green finance must increase 3.5 times to 11 lakh crores annually to meet the above promises by 2030, needs to be kept in mind. While it is a good beginning that we have shifted resources towards green financing, much more needs to be done. And for this, there is no alternative but to raise more resources. A tax GDP ratio continues to hover around 10%, 10 to 11%. And unless we are able to mobilize taxes and not continuously forego taxes, even on the super rich, I think we would not be in a position to do. Now, I would conclude by saying that this budget has a dream, is the first of the 25-year vision that is there, which has started with physical infrastructure, boosting physical infrastructure. I think much more needs to be done and attention needs to be given to enhancing people's capabilities so that what we dream about does not go up in smoke. It need not be a waste of all the efforts that we have done by getting physical infrastructure in place, but not having the people's capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Prabhu, for bringing in the social sector. The longest chapter in economic survey was chapter 6, which was on social sector. And it looks at social sector in a very different way than the usual way that it has been looked at in the past. Now we move to Professor Ram.
Thank you, Professor Asha. Thank you, IMPRI, for having me. Could you share my presentation, please? I'm unable to share it, Arjun. I have...
It's on. You can see it.
Yeah, next slide, please. See, much has been said about the good aspects of the budget, and there's a massive transformation that is being planned. And 3% of GDP in capital expenditure is approaching saturation levels, because what we have found in industry over the last 30 years of research is when capital expenditure exceeds 3.5 to 4% of the revenue, the system becomes unsteady and unable to handle it. I'm not too sure if the capital output ratios in the ICAR for the governments remain the same, but it cannot be too different. I'm focusing on the need to increase manufacturing and scale it from 16% of GDP, where it has been languishing for more than 2 decades, to 25%. This is massive, and it's a complete recast. It's a transformation that is required. You cannot tinker with it as this budget is done and hope that it will take it up. I will explain why. Now, we want to create a competitive manufacturing sector, improve export opportunities, commitment to skill development, and focus on the few sectors that I have listed: defense, railways, electronics, mobile phones, and white goods. Next slide, please. Well, to start with, if you're going at this manufacturing level, it's not going to be from large industries. We are going to have a plethora of medium and small industries, which are inevitable, as we have learned the world over, be it Germany, Japan, Korea, wherever it is. But the manufacturing sector has not so far covered itself in glory. Very briefly, they are not a major driver of GDP, though they employ massive amounts of people. Nearly 50% of the people are employed by the manufacturing sector and the automotive sector. The sustained inadequate factor productivity. This is a huge area that Mukul and I have been researching for many years. To put it frankly, it is abysmal in India, and this needs large-scale rectification, else it's going to be a pipe dream. Gross value added is poor, as this survey also points out. There has been a marginal increase of 3.7 in gross value added in the manufacturing and industrial sector. But compared to all the other sectors globally, even in countries like Brazil and elsewhere, we are way, way behind. There's inadequate employment generation, and even the jobs that are created are of very poor quality. Right? And it has not hardly been a significant source of innovation. That said, given the PLI schemes in the last few years, there has been quite a lot of progress by innovation in the small industries. Next slide, please. It is a primary driver of transformation, but for me, I'm focusing on one single area or two areas. We do not get clean, reliable 24/365 energy in this country. It is pathetic. I was in the hills. I have a home in the hills. In the last 3 weeks, we have been without power for close to 10 days. Right? And the balance time, we get power voltages fluctuating from 140 volts to 300 volts. And this is just a sample. Right? So while it's very nice to say we are 100%, 104% of generation required to the country, it's very laudable, but that's not the issue. Unless we get clear, abundant, reliable power, none of our industries that we are targeting, defense, microelectronics, components, will progress. Concomitantly, we have to generate huge quantities of water. Don't underestimate the quantity of water required by the electronic industry. The water has to be clean. It has to have specific pH. It has to have a specific hardness, so on and so forth. And we have not addressed any of these in the budget. And one gets a sense that we hope if you generate electricity, automatically everything will get better. Next slide, please. Right. Now, manufacturing has to contribute to the quality of living. It is not. I cannot go into a hospital without a genset backup. I cannot get into manufacturing MSME without providing for a genset. All this adds to cost, which lowers your productivity and decreases your competitiveness. I won't go through the slide in detail, but essentially our manufacturing today is a me too. There is no creativity, there's very little innovation happening, and this cannot happen by diktat. If I'm worried about whether my machine is going to run or my lab is going to get power, I cannot be bothered about investing in costly equipment which would be required for high-end research. Right? We have to work on the fact that and treat electricity and water as basic rights. Today, every electricity board has a charter, citizen's charter. I have taken this cognizance of this and challenged them. And believe me, there's not a word of it that is known to any of the operative officers. It's far, far from the truth. They can't be bothered whether you get energy or don't get energy. And unless we establish a quality of living, being aspirational and wanting to be on par as a developed country is not going to happen by accident. It requires, and I would like to ask anybody here to name one country which has become a developed country without clean power and clean water. Next slide, please. These are all the various sectors I've deliberately identified, the current players and the emerging players. All of them, without exception, including banking and finance, require high quality energy. And high quality energy is essential for internet transactions. At least 30% of the time in the south of India, which is reasonably well connected, I'm unable to do a phone pay or a Paytm simply because I'm not able to connect to the internet. Why? There is no power available. Second, many of the public institutions don't have battery backups and cannot get you onto the net in time. Next slide, please. This is a very hopeful picture showing how much of India has got power. The green, it's in my thing is very, very hard to believe, right? You do not get clean power. There is fluctuation, there's volatility, there is surge. And I can tell you, in 10 years of living in the hills, I have changed 20 cameras 3 times because all of them burnt out. And last week, my UPS burnt out because the voltage went to 450. Am I alone in this? I don't think I'm alone in this. Most people are not tracking and just give it up. This slide is one of hope. This is not a one of reality. Right? Even in Coimbatore, where I'm sitting today, this morning for 10 minutes, I was without power. Right? Next slide, please. Right? The problem, we seem to be very content saying we're generating enough power. We have 2 issues here. India is probably in the lower quartile on per capita energy consumption globally. Certainly it is per 1/4 of China. If you have manufacturing-led growth ambitions, our generation capacity has to be enormous, and there is a serious commitment to clean energy and stuff like that. That is laudable. But I have not seen any reference to improving the quality of transmission and distribution of electricity in this country. Yes, it's a state subject. I see that point. But the point is, if you're going to set up manufacturing infrastructure with dirty power, you're not going to move your position from 108th place in out of 141 countries in the reliability of power. Next slide, please. You can see the per capita consumption. India is a bleak yellow compared to most of the other countries which are approaching green. Next one, please. Right. I have already indicated this. I've already said what the major challenges are. Right. The dirty power. And the irony is, India today does not have a standard which matches global requirements for stable, clean power. Each state manages it differently. And the argument is, if I give you enough voltage and frequency, it is fine. They also have some strange notions that if a power cut is for less than 10 minutes, it's not considered a power cut. If a power cut is for repair and services, it's not considered a loss of energy transmission, and so on and so forth. We are deceiving ourselves, and we need to look at ourselves more rationally and nationally. Next slide, please. There is power, I have said enough.
5 minutes.
How much?
Sorry, 5 minutes, please.
Oh, yes, it's a long time. Now, there's a budgetary commitment to waste management. Yes, the Jal Jeevan scheme is going on strongly. But as an aside, what the local guys are telling you is, whatever water supply you're connecting, please allocate it to the Jal Jeevan scheme. There's no new investments coming in many areas. Be that as it may, I don't see a plan for a circular management of water in the sense I provide clean water. It is going to become sewage and sullage. And how are you going to treat it? There is no national policy on this. So you'll have a lot of water coming out now, but there's been no way to treat it. And the environmental damage that it can cause can be enormous. Right? Now, we have done a paper on how micro PPPs have done waste management in specific areas in the hills in Nilgiris. Mukul and I have done it. They have done some brilliant work, but it is in isolation. Where we have done it, 25 kilometers away, they are not able to replicate it. And these were all informal PPPs. I think these should be encouraged and these should be micro-funded as seed funding, because the government lacks the sheer reach to manage water and waste across the nation. And as you grow more on engineering and manufacturing, your industrial waste is going to increase. Take PCB, for example. Discarded PCBs are rich in gold and lead, which can be recycled. Take hospital waste. There is no formal hospital waste management system except in 2 cities, Pune and Indore, that I know of. I could be wrong. And hospital waste management, as people get older and sicker, requires a separate entity altogether. So to summarize up to this point, electricity and energy demand management and water management are vital for progress. But this budget has only made a cursory reference to it, and I believe a very sustained look at it is necessary. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Arjun? Yeah. I've already mentioned about growth and manufacturing. Manufacturing is stuck, and transformation requires that we need a radical rethink, and I'm changing tack here now. Yes, electricity, water are important, but there's something even more subliminal here, and I think Dr. Prabhu mentioned it. I'm going to take up on the skilling aspect of it. Next slide, please. Arjun, next slide. Yeah. I did a dipstick about a year ago and found out what is it that really ails the MSME. This doesn't purport to be a formal study. I think a lot more has to be done. And the only comment in the budget is 2 areas is that we'll make sure receivables are paid faster to MSME. Question that I have had, and I have come from deep within the MSME. I've run my own family business for years. I worked with several MSMEs as a consultant, reshaped many of them. And each sector requires unique attention, and simple standalone presumptive assumptions are not going to work. We need more depth. Next slide, please. You can see this here. The green areas, network for MSME support industries. 77% of the respondents said MSMEs needed, don't have it. Ditto, achieving globally competitive gross value added. Gross value added. And value added in agriculture, processed foods, for example, we are way behind. And electrical components and chips, only 46% believe that the MSME is capable of competing. This is the strategic level. Now let's go to the operational level. Next one, please. You can see lack of skilled labor. 52% believe it is so. Inability to innovate is around 60%. And if you go through to the final one, process efficiencies is also an abysmal 52% who say they can't compete. And working capital management is much of the lower one, 49%. Out of these 10 odd factors, we take a single factor and say we'll make their working capital better, and this will streamline the industry, is a bit of a pie in the sky thinking which we need to think about. Yes, this requires a lot more study, but I'm sure given the government's resources, they can do a lot more, provided they understand what MSME is about. Next slide, please.
Ram, 1 minute, please.
Yeah. Now, EVs are in danger. They are going to obsolete many industries, and EVs will require certain industries to reduce their volume of manufacturing and get into more bespoke, highly specialized manufacturing, which will require clean energy, of course, clean water, of course, but also highly specialized and skilled services, a lot of innovation and creativity. Next slide, please. Now, the training and skilling challenge. Now, this is a very dense slide, but suffice it to say, India spends 0.6% on its skilling, whereas most of the other companies spend about 70 to 75% on their skill development, number of people who are skilled. India, we are less than 1%. So the skilling challenge, whether you call it under education, call it under industry, or whatever it is enormous. We don't have plumbers, we don't have electricians, we don't have technicians. We are lacking in every area. So what do we do about it? Next one, please. Skill development, we are again going by numbers. We have trained 21 lakhs. I can tell you, industry loves the combination scheme of giving graduates to work with them in place of unhired labor, and they stay on and so forth. Something like the Agniveer experiment in industry is good. But you can't expect industry to train people, spend on investment, spend on teaching them how to do things and expect them to be competitive. All of this costs money, and a lot of money going forward, right? So there are many areas, including language skills, which need to be inculcated. Next one, please. And what I'm very strongly urging is we take a holistic look at skill development, and as reference, I'm posting 2 models out of many good models for skilling and development. The Japanese structure, which is establishing viability of the business first. We are not even concerned about the viability of the bulk of our MSME. Streamline systems and processes, huge opportunity, very little done. Ensure competitiveness, and then they take them global. The JETRO funds this. In Germany, the structure is different. They take systems and processes for granted, work closely with industry on skilling, foster innovation, and MSME feeds off and into conglomerates. It's a very symbiotic relationship, which we don't see. Out of the 41 PLI schemes, only about 100 odd MSMEs have been benefited, which is peanuts compared to the millions that we have. Next slide, please. So we need abundant clean power at point of use. No point telling me it's at point of generation. Effective management of waste. Productive MSME is the spine for transforming manufacturing, and it is abysmal today. We need a huge amount. Lowering finance costs and early settlement will help. Finance is not the central issue. Credit growth has been remarkably high at 30% or average during January, November. But compared to this credit growth, what is the output? And several established skilling models are available. India has to focus on it. It will require massive budgetary support because no industry body or industry can afford to put this sort of money into skilling. And the government has its job cut out to provide clean, stable energy, clean water, recycle that water, reuse that water, keep the circular management of water going, and build the skill levels of people. I think all these things are missing in the budget, and they should be addressed sooner than later for us to take off, which we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, for bringing in the manufacturing experience, rich experience, which you have, and which goes into how to make the MSMEs competitive. What are the ingredients needed for that? Last but not the least, may I request now Dr. Reddy, Professor Reddy, to make his presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Arjun, for inviting me for this important discussion. As other speakers covered many aspects, I will cover this, 7 out of 7 priorities, this inclusive development and reaching the last mile. This also infrastructure and investment in the perspective of rural areas or agriculture. So these, these 3-4 areas I will cover. Basically, if you see, this is the, the overall theme is the transformation. If you see last 10 years back, if you go to villages, even both state government and also central government, most of the schemes are directly involved with the farmers, end users. Like they are providing farm machinery, they are providing some fertilizer directly, they are providing all this sort of assistance or advice or extension work. They are very much interacted with the farmers. But with this, we are just moving towards more of a DBT, direct benefit transfer, direct money transfer type of schemes, especially when we are transition to this type of schemes. Somehow we are at the grassroots level, we are missing that human touch with the farmers. That's what we have seen. Of course, the states like Telangana, Andhra Pradesh or Punjab, which are already developed, already mechanized, already farmers are well advanced in terms of technology. Definitely these states, this direct benefit transfer is okay. But in terms of, for example, Chhattisgarh or Bihar or Assam or Orissa, these type of states which are backward in terms of technology absorption and all, these direct transfers may be helpful in reducing corruption, directly transferring money to the farmers, but they are somehow not able to bridge the gap in technology adoption or this type of improvement. Because as on today, we are, most of the food grains and all these things, we are now surplus. We are able to export at least 30 to 40% of our agricultural production to different countries. So for this, we need quality and competitiveness. These things will only comes when there is a the higher interaction between the government and the farmer end users and also private sector. So this is the background of my discussion. So if you see this this budget proposed very nice schemes, especially digital platforms like Agricultural Accelerated Fund. This is main intention is promote startups which are related to agriculture and bottom-up approach. There are number of new technologies are coming up in the private sector, like drones, like the different type of farm machinery, custom hiring centers. All these things are coming. So to energize those activities at grassroots level, this accelerated fund, that is very, very good initiative. And again, digital public infrastructure. These, for example, at cooperative village level cooperatives, different other institutions, they're all working now. And now it is a need for digitizing all these platforms. But of course, we have to remember that these grassroots level institutions are basically the people driver, means decentralized institutions. They should not be, overemphasized on the technology and underemphasized on the human capital at the grassroots level. We have to promote local initiatives. We have to promote local, innovations, interactions among the people, checks and balances within the local ecosystem, so that there will be, the progress will be much faster. This digital public infrastructure will be helpful, especially cooperatives. Number of cooperatives are working, but they are not, they are, the saddled with the corruption type of thing. They are, malpractices, all sorts of malpractices. Even mandis, APMC markets at mandal level, there are also all the sort of malpractices are going on. This digital public infrastructure in the agriculture sector probably will be one of the way we can, remove some of these, the malpractices and make the whole system more transparent, especially the electronic agricultural, national agricultural market, they are coming up some, but that whole ecosystem is not prepared well to take up this digital infrastructure in a proper way, so that we need both public and private participation, and also people participation to spread these digital platforms. Again, this 20 lakh crore credit, this is the last 3-4 years government of India is emphasizing on expanding agricultural credit to the farmers. The limit for the agricultural credit also increased to 2 lakh. That is a very good indication. But thing is that at a village level, we are seeing most of these, about 30% or 25 to 30% of the small and marginal farmers, mostly tenant farmers. So these, when you are introducing the digital platforms and everything, they are somehow linked to this land ownership. They are not linked to the cultivation, but they are, most of the states, they are directly linked to the land ownership, like the PM Kisan. Only owners, land owners will get 6,000 rupees per per farmer. And most of the Raitu Bharosa, other schemes also, they are mostly land ownership based. So, for example, a land owner and a tenant farmer, if you see, the land owner is getting the credit, is getting the crop insurance, is getting input subsidy, is getting all the schemes, is getting all the benefits from these government schemes. Maybe plethora of schemes are there, state governments, central governments, all these these state and central government schemes has to depend on this digital public infrastructure. So one lacuna is how we can incorporate or include the tenant farming systems in these digital platforms. It is a the trial basis they are doing, but still it is not that much successful. There is a much need to be done in this area. Again, this natural farming, government of India is promoting the natural farming. I think 10% of the area we have to convert into natural farming, or 1 crore farmers out of, we are having 13-14 crore farmers in India. Out of this 10%, one crore farmers, they have to convert. Their target is within 3 years we have to convert into natural farming. For that they want to bio input, 10,000 bio input resource centers they want to establish. But this is again lot of this Andhra Pradesh government also doing a lot of experiments on bio input resource centers like Jivamruta, Bijamruta and all these things. But somehow this we are not able to develop a protocol type of thing. Protocols or science-based protocols or evidence-based protocols for natural farming or organic agriculture. As on today, there is a lot of need to be done in this respect, and to upscale this bio input resource center, because the food subsidy, especially fertilizer subsidy, the last year is 2.25 lakh 2.25 lakh crores, a huge amount. Now this year it is reduced to 1.75. With this intention, at least some input intensive, fertilizer intensive agriculture may be converted into this organic agriculture or natural agriculture. But still it is in a trial basis. We don't have any protocols at national level or even state level. There's a lot need to be done at research and development, because in the agriculture sector, a lot of schemes, for example, food subsidy, we are giving 2.8, last year 2.87 lakh crores, and this year 1.97 lakh crores, 30% reduction. Fertilizer subsidy, again, last year 2.25 lakh crore, this year reduced by 22%. And so we need to, at least these subsidy schemes, okay, because during the last 3 years of COVID period and post-COVID period, agriculture sector performed very well. But when it comes to international competitiveness, we are not still at there. Our productivity levels are very low. There is a need for increasing R&D expenditure so that the farmers yields productivity and competitiveness at the global needs need to be enhanced, so that at least 30 to 40% of our our production will be exported. Then only our target of reaching doubling farmers income, this type of increasing farmers income will happen. Otherwise, what will happen? Only the glut in the market will take place. A lot of commodities, there is no market. For example, tomatoes, chilies, so many other commodities. Of course, these 2-3 years there is a good market globally because global supply concerns are there. We are having a lot of exports also, different commodities like basmati, wheat, and all these commodities we are exporting. Fish, we are exporting. But if we pass through this COVID or post-COVID situation, then there is a possibility of glut in the market that we have to prepare with more competitiveness, more productivity type of things. Again, in this budget, they have given a lot of preference for Matsya Sampada Yojana, PM Matsya Sampada Yojana. This is fishery scheme, and also livestock and dairy. These are the growing sectors, and they have given right priority for but budget enhances are not that much prominent. Even agriculture research and development and all these very nominal increases are there. And this year is International Year of Millets. So for millet promotion, Sri Anna, that one scheme is introduced to enhance the research and R&D capabilities in the millets sector. That is one positive side. Again, cooperatives, they want to develop digital infrastructure in the cooperative sector. That's very very good, because most of the cooperatives are lot of misuse or misgovernance, all these types of going on since not only last 10 years, last 50 years. Cooperatives, APMC market committees, agriculture produce market committees at mandal level, all these are in many of the states last 30 years there are no elections, only nominated positions are there. They are the future politicians or something like that. They're all siphoning of this cess and all, and spending for their own benefit. So at least if we digitize all these cooperatives and APMC markets, etc., local infrastructure, at least there will be increased transparency, there will be less corruption, there will be the local decentralized governance. So those types of things will be very effective. And waste to wealth, a lot of biomass, government of India, there is a lot of biomass wasted every year. So waste to wealth scheme, under the waste to wealth scheme, the government allocated some 10,000 crores, and also compressed biomass is a compulsory for the yes. Okay.
3 minutes, please.
Okay, right. So these are some of the very important initiatives by the government of India now. Agriculture sector, again, the tribal areas, tribal welfare, Prime Minister, primitive, vulnerable tribal groups, they have allocated some budget. Free food scheme. During that COVID period, the Prime Minister Anna Yojana, that free food subsidy for many 80 or 80 crore population, that scheme is going to be continued, but with more target approach. Again, for this skill development is also a lot of things are going on. It's a high priority area, because in the rural areas, especially the educated unemployed is huge number is surging, 20%, 30%. Those uneducated educated unemployed youth, we have to divert them into the private sector and creating employment. The whole focus of this 10 lakh crore in investment capital expenditure, if it energize the private sector, crowd in private sector, then there will be possibility of rural jobs creation, and these rural youth to be ready to take up those rural jobs, they need to be highly skilled and skill oriented. So that way this scheme may be very much helpful. Again, this easy of doing business, that is a very lot of emphasis is going on that easy of doing business, digitization, PAN as a common identifier. Without a lot of budget, these things will have a lot of good impact at grassroots level, digital locker and all these things. So in the case of budgets, for example, MG Narega budget is reduced by 32%, but it is not very hard rule, because it is very MG Narega budget is demand driven and flexible. We can increase as and when there is a demand for the labor in the rural areas. So basically in the rural areas, food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, the subsidy and social safety, the budget is reduced because we are recovering from the post-COVID situation, so it is okay. But again, this the Department of Agriculture Research and Education, Agriculture Research and Education only 10% increase. Otherwise, the more focus is on infrastructure development and development expenditure, asset creation. I think all these expenditure may have some crowding effect and generate rural employment. I think this is my take on agriculture and rural sectors. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Reddy, for so passionately bringing and linking agriculture with the current budget. Many important points have been made. So with this, we have all the speakers who have made their presentations. How shall we proceed now? Arjun?
Sir, we can go to each panelist. You can raise certain questions to them if you have it in mind. Then go to them one by one.
Does anybody else have questions?
No, sir. I will assist in that if there will be questions.
Okay. So what I would suggest is that in 2 minutes, if you can make your last points or the summary points after hearing everybody. I'm very impressed with the diversity of the panel. Compliments to you, Arjun, and the different ways in which they have focused on the budget. From my side, I'll make only one point, and that is that even if the occasion is the union budget, we should not forget that more than half of the expenditure and revenue are diverted through the states. And we got to have, several speakers did alluded to it, that the states must have greater accountability and greater responsibility, and not everything should be on the union. So for example, it was mentioned that the tax to GDP ratio is 11% and so on. That's not the case, because once you look at the states, then the tax to GDP ratio is 22%. Total receipt to GDP ratio is 30+%, 32, and same with the expenditure. So you got almost 1/3 of the equivalent of GDP, not GDP, is passing through the budgets in the general government sector. And we need to keep that in mind, even when we are talking about the budget that receives the most attention, which is the union budget. And it is said that there are very few specialists in state budgets, and they don't receive the kind of attention which they deserve. So now what I would suggest is that we go in the reverse sequence. So Dr. Reddy, Professor Reddy, you spoke last, so you go first, 2 minutes, please. Okay. I won't remind, just 2 minutes.
The last 2-3 years we have seen this farm laws and MSP discussion, and we also know what are the political implications of all these things. But this budget didn't say anything about the MSP. Probably this no direction should be from shifting from MSP, minimum support price, which is very concentrated in 1 or 2 crops and 1 or 2 few states, and very Western India, some type of geographical focus, but probably shifting from MSP to the DBT, direct benefit transfer, like PM Kisan. Every farmer some 6,000 rupees, direct money transfer. That is a very, very good idea. But gradually we have to shift. Probably we are spending some 2 lakh crore rupees on the budget to MSP, but we are not. We are just spending some 60,000 crores this year allocation. Probably slowly or even gradually we have to increase budget allocation for DBT. For example, 6,000 crores is not sufficient for many farmers to purchase for minimum fertilizers like fertilizer and seed. We have to gradually probably link with the inflation or link with other purchasing power or consumer price index or something like that, so that the gradually we will move from MSP to the DBT type of schemes.
Thank you very much. Professor Ram?
Yeah, I'll come back to what I said and stay with it. It is estimated that the loss of GDP is close to 1.42% because of poor power. Now, I think that itself is a very low guesstimate, and I'll tell you why. The sort of support industries that are now coming up and which are consuming huge amount of resources because of poor quality of energy. People talk about solar systems. I have been using solar since 2011, and I can tell you 70% of the time I'm using solar because there is no electricity available, and I've gone on enhancing it from 3 kilowatts to 5.5 kilowatts, and I'm still running short. So what I'm trying to make is things like solar energy, gensets, voltage controllers, stabilizers. These are all huge investments, alternative investments, which are coming into the GDP simply because you don't have clean power. So now if you have, and these are consuming resources, they're taking skilled labor. I can tell you every town now has a person who's a specialist in how to manage bad electricity. That's a huge service industry building up. You're having massive manufacturing infrastructure and manufacturing of stabilizers and stuff like that. And what people don't realize is stabilizers themselves consume 20% of the energy that they stabilize. So we have to get very realistic about how these, what I call pseudo industries and services, are eating into our GDP. If you provide clean power, see, large states like Germany, United States, tiny states like Singapore have absolutely flawless. I spent 22 years in Singapore and I faced one power cut, right? So we need to understand the implications of these pseudo industries, because when that goes, a lot of resources that are currently going into it, what sort of resources? All of them use copper, all of them use IC chips, all of them use metal, all of them use labor. This is going to get hit very badly. And lastly, I would still say that this government has to start looking at the circular management of water, because the ecological damage that it is causing is enormous, absolutely enormous. And I can tell you, some very elegant organic solutions have been found which are eating up sewage, and you're able to use it for water harvesting, and I'm using it in agriculture. I'm doing drip irrigation with that. So I'm not talking pie in the sky. I'm talking about things that I've experimented with it for close to a decade. And I'm saying that as a nation, we need to look at this, because water is going to be scarce. So reusing water is a phenomenal challenge for us, which we should be doing and which you're not doing. Electricity, we are creating pseudo industries which are eating into our resources, and it's high time we got realistic about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ram. Professor K. Sita Prabhu, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think the 2 points that I still stick to is, one is that skills are important, but the type of skills that are looking, and skills do not come without a basic education. You see, there has to be the ability to decode information and to have innovations, implement innovations, understand what the innovation is, builds on a stable background or a foundation of good secondary education, like the case of South Korea. 10 years of universal secondary education, good quality education that has been provided, has enabled it to adopt innovations and move. Training also can be done at the industrial level or by the government skill development, only if you have a basic literacy and ability to understand the types of innovations that are coming in. So good quality secondary education is a must. Whether you allocate more resources, whether you find other means of support for secondary education, I think it's long been neglected. We are either looking at higher education, IITs and so on, improving the quality, which is very welcome. We are looking at primary education, which is also good, but then the middle that has to be given much greater attention. I would also reiterate the fact that nutrition has always been the Achilles heel of Indian policy, and you cannot be a developed nation with 1/3 of your children being undernourished and stunted and so on. So a huge effort has to be made to build up the capabilities of the people, and a broad-based one. It is not some schools of excellence here and there. I have nothing against artificial intelligence. All that is required. These are scenes of the future. 21st century requires these. But unless you have this, and where else in the world do you have a country with 490 million, vulnerable and poor people? You will say that the growth will trickle down. It has not trickled down in the past 65 years to the extent that is required. A concerted effort has to be made. The multiplier effects of physical infrastructure will reach. But are we looking only at unskilled work? We have to look at something much more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Mukul, may I just add something to what Dr. Prabhu said?
Yes, please.
I think one of the disservices that we are doing to our population is going away from a common unifying language, whether we like it or not. Instruction manuals globally are available in English. Of course, they're available in German, Czech, and Hebrew, which is not of much use to us. But we need to understand the importance of language. I can tell you, again, the areas that I'm working with many NGOs here. It is heartbreaking to see that there are people who are jobless, are unable to migrate out of the state simply because they have a complete language incompetence. Equally so, people who are desperate for jobs, Professor Day made a mention about the vertical line, which is a very impressive way of thinking about this. The way they pick up local languages is phenomenal. There is a hunger. So what I'm saying is, when people are having a certain level of comfort in their incomes because the parents are well off or the state is supporting them with everything, there is no interest in learning language. They're not able to service. So most of the service technicians have to come from outside the state. This is a reality here. I'm not cribbing about it. I speak Tamil, I speak my local language. I'm very proud of it. All that is secondary. But the lingua franca for development has to be a unifying language. And permitting multiple languages, I think we're doing a disservice to our succession generations.
But sir, Tamil Nadu would object first. Tamil Nadu would object first to the imposition of Hindi.
Yes, and I'll get murdered if I take too much of it, but doesn't matter. I'll take the risk one of these days.
Okay, Professor Day, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, first of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists and the chair for making it very stimulating. See, the budget is, as I said, that it's not everything. It's not a panacea for all our issues, but as a way forward, I would like to see, things like, this capital expenditure for $10 trillion for 2023-24 financial year. Now, the budget is going to be the last full-scale budget before the general election in 2024. Expecting an interim budget next year. So somebody, Professor Pandey or you, sir, please alluded to that if we can't utilize the full fund, what's going to happen? Will it have a spillover for the next year? And how we are going to utilize it? So this is, I'm interested to know, are we capable enough to implement all of it by 31st March 2024 for whatever we have allotted? So this is a question to the panelists. Second is, and as I said in my presentation, that I'm more comfortable in talking about external economy. And now, in the union budget, as I said, there is no scope for bringing it here, the value chain or kind of a production link that Professor Asar talked about in his many seminal papers, and we have been discussing about it. But there was an attempt in this budget to correct some part of it. Like as I said, that to encourage television, mobile phone, electronic industries, value chain production linkages, there was a duty cut, but these are temporary in nature. Today coming from 7.5% basic custom duty to 0, this can be reversed back in the next year budget. So there are many things in that. There is a no clear sustainability or complete fall down, cut down of those kind of duties for any particular product. So I hope we should carefully look at what kind of duty reduction we are doing, and there should be on sustainable basis for in the future budgets as well. Point number 3, there was I just seen the number here. The first time there are incentives like the remission of duties and taxes on exports products, or rebate on state and central taxes and levies. There were some amount of allotted in the budget estimate, like in the first 15,000 crore, and next one is 8,500 crores for these 2 incentives. These 2 incentives are pretty good to encourage exporters for the country. But if we compare to all our efforts, like through the PLI and others, these are not in a handsome amount that has been allotted, but the effort is good. So point number 3 is that please, when the foreign trade policy, which is the non-financial text, is not there, so maybe the budget and the future budget should minutely look at it. Last, I would say that just an idea, a naive idea, that if we talk about come out of a colonial hangover, if we aim to come out for a colonial hangover or colonial mindset, often we use, why not we think to take out the union budget from Delhi to some parts of some parts of India, for example, and periodically move out and look at how the response will be. Next year, if you do the budget president in Chennai, I'm sure there will be huge interest there, or somewhere in going to Maharashtra, or remotest part in Manipur. So I think this would be my some name suggestions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I think Dr. Pandey is better able to address your concern about what if the money is not spent. I may make just 2 quick points. One is that the proposal to develop a transshipment port in Andaman Nicobar is going to have a huge external implications, and we need to follow that closely. Secondly, the budget allocation to the external sector needs to be looked at along with the Commerce Ministry, because that's where a lot of diplomacy is economic diplomacy, and they are tied together. So this is just 2 points. Dr. Pandey, you have the last word.
Thank you, Professor Asher. Thank you, IMPRI, for having me. I'll just make 2 points, just as a continuation of what I spoke about. One is that though the budget has stuck to its fiscal consolidation roadmap, execution will be important. Second part is that capital expenditure allocation has been increased, but again, implementation is important. And secondly, the second order question is important, whether it is helping in crowding in private investments or not. That is very important, because if we have beyond a certain point, it may well be that it leads to crowding out of private sector investment. So if we have more public investment, there will be more supply of bonds, there will be less resources available for private sector investment. So all those are subtle questions that need to be seen, that till what time capex, public capex, can be the source of engine of economic growth. At this point, it is important because of instability. Private sector investment may not be forthcoming, but beyond the point, these questions need to be understood, that whether capex, public capex, is leading to crowding in of private sector investment, and what else needs to be done in addition to enhancing the allocation of capex. What else needs to be done Are there more needs to be done on reducing the compliance, improving the ease of doing business in the country? What needs to be done for easing foreign investments? What about withholding tax for foreign investors? So these are some of the other questions that will help in incentivizing private and foreign sector investment. And the last point is that disinvestment. This is one budget head which saw cut. There was disinvestment receipts were expected to be higher, but in the revised estimates for the current financial year, we have seen that the disinvestment receipts have been reduced to 60,000 crore. Even for the next year, disinvestment receipts have been kept at 61,000 crore. And in the finance minister's speech, we did not get to hear much about the strategic disinvestment policy of the government, because if we see the last 2 years budget, the finance minister did stress about having a strategic disinvestment policy, having some roadmap for privatization of public sector entities. So what is the vision of the government on that? Whether they're going slow on that, that needs to be much more clear coming out of the budget speech. That is another point. And the last point is that when we talk about revenue receipts, we often talk about only taxes. Now we need to see two things. One is that now GST, goods and services tax, has now become the most important source of taxes. Income tax and corporate tax has gone down. GST growth is also pegged to be higher as compared to income and corporate tax. That is one thing. And the second thing is that non-tax revenue share is going down. Now, non-tax revenue includes things like dividends from public sector enterprises. Now, if there is a absolute decline, not only in terms of GDP, but there is an absolute decline in the dividends from public sector enterprises, we need to think about their contribution to GVA, their contribution to the revenue. So these are some of the things that also need equal attention in tandem with just the tax revenues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those points. Yes, anybody would like
to? I just like to respond to Dr. Dey's comment on subsidies.
Please.
See, I'll just take one industry and work it through. Take the textile industry, garments specifically in India. Vietnam and Bangladesh didn't have an industry 40 years ago. Today, they are twice the size of India, right? And the subsidies that have been given to the textile sector are ridiculous. I can take you to Tirupur, any textile garmenting guy, and his house, if it's less than 2 acres, he'll be considered a poor man. Why I'm saying this is, the average productivity of a garment manufacturer making shirts in India is around 7 shirts per machine per man per day. I have advised them and I've restructured them, right? Global average is 25. Now, if a tailor can make 25 shirts, you don't need subsidies. If you can give him clean power, he doesn't need subsidies. If you give him clean water, he doesn't need subsidies. Basically, giving subsidies has destroyed them to an extent. During COVID, 7 new companies developed the PPE kits and the masks. When the Tirupur guys went to Delhi and said, give us a subsidy for importing the technology for this. So we have to have a trade-off here. And my belief is, if you let the industry and give them what it takes to succeed, be productive, be competitive, and give them that at a reasonable cost, we will get there. Subsidies may be incidental only to kickstart specific sectors like PLI or chip manufacturing or some such, where technology has to be brought in. I think a lot more detailed work is required in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. For those of us in the academia and in the research think tanks, budget has provided so many interesting puzzles. And many of you have indicated some of the areas, like whether CapEx by government will be crowding in private CapEx or crowding out. And this kind of puzzles makes the life very exciting. That's why the economist's life is never dull. And on that note, Arjun, can we conclude this discussion?
Yes, sir. Your concluding remarks, then we'll have a vote.
Yeah, these are my concluding remarks. So, congratulations to you again for having the vision to do thematic so that you can do full justice to the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Officially, I would like to thank all of you, our chair, Professor Mukul sir, Professor Amarender Reddy, Dr. Radhika ma'am, Professor Prabhu, Professor Day, and Mr. V. Ramakrishnan sir. Thank you for joining this panel discussion on New India's economic transformation and Union Budget 23-24. Wishing you a good day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.